Welcome back to At Home with Mr. K, the series of me as an ag teacher doing some random projects, primarily taxidermy and then skeletal articulation. So I was on skeletal articulation. This is the next video in that series. And a couple of things. I didn't have actual hydrogen peroxide to whiten the bones that I had. So I tried an alternative, which was a oxidizing pool shock in powder form. The downside, it just didn't do a very good job. So I have those bones, I rinsed them, cleaned them up. They're still in the kettle drying, and then I'm going to pick up real hydrogen peroxide in order to get that done right. So what I have here is a skeleton that we started in class, and then of course, didn't have time to finish. The skull is in pretty good shape. This was all soaked in hydrogen peroxide. This was never ammonia dipped, so it's a little bit oilier than if I had done ammonia work on it, but it's a decent, the bones look decent, they're in good shape, they're clean. Now the downside is, so the upside to doing it the right way, where we put these bones into little cheesecloth bags, is then they're in some kind of order. That's how the class did it. But then, of course, when they got into, hey, no more time, I said, hey, guys, clean up the bones, get them into the bin. They just shoveled them all into the bin. So I have all my ribs everywhere. I've got the classroom birds at home, and they're obnoxious, so hopefully they won't ruin this video. But I've got ribs everywhere. I've got these vertebrae that are super challenging to figure out what goes where. Some of them are already together, and then there's a bunch that are just random. So I've got a 206-piece puzzle here to put together without much for instruction. Now, the internet is awesome. It is so much easier to look up skeletal system of a raccoon or a cat or a dog or a coyote or whatever project you're doing. It's way better now than it used to be to access that. The other great resource is the Bone Builder's Notebook or the individual manuals made by Lee Post. Lee Post is fantastic. He does an amazing job. He wrote the book on skeletal articulation he's on here, right? I just looked at these. This one's in the wrong place, so I gotta move him. But he's up in Alaska. Anyways, I digress. Those who are watching it now probably aren't my students. It's on YouTube, so you might see it. But if you are part of the Ag Teachers, Wisconsin Association of Ag Educators, this is the last video in the skeletal articulation segment. I realized, again, this is at home with me. I am not a professional taxidermist. I've never gone to school for it. I've had students go off to school for taxidermy, which is kind of exciting. I've had one that made a career out of it, and that's pretty neat. And there are some great schools. He went, I think, out to Iowa. There are some great ones in our area in southern Wisconsin. A lot of opportunities. But anyways, I digress. I have to show you how do you reassemble the skeleton now. One thing is to know what bones connect to what bones. So that's going to take research. It's going to take a manual, something along those lines. I'm not going to teach you today what bones go to what bones. My focus is going to be how do we connect the bones that we know go together, okay? There are a few different ways to connect bones. I really like with larger bones, which these aren't huge by any means, but you can already tell what these two are, right? So these guys will be a part of the hip socket, and one on each side, just like so, and they're going to install like that. And we know that knees bend backwards, so the femur goes forward, and then the rest of the leg here, right here. This is not this side, this is the other side here, and this will hinge on that, correct? Makes sense? Not like this, the bone actually kind of faces back, but and you can generally see when you set them together, you're like, wow, that feels like a pretty good joint there. Question is, how do we hook all this together? I'll start with a leg. Things we can do. One, we can just install it and glue it. We can just say, oh, I'm just going to glue it. Glue will work to hold it for a period of time. A lot of times the glues break down. My favorite glue to use is the Gorilla Super Glue Gel, because it gives you a little more working time, and it goes on kind of thick. I also have some thin super glue that I can wick in. I'll use that afterwards, and if I'm using that, I definitely use an instant accelerator, because even though super glue says, oh, bonds instantly, it takes a while. When you're holding this for a minute, you wiggle it all, and all of a sudden you broke your glue joint. So the other thing I like to do is I like to use metal to assist me in holding pieces together, especially the limbs. Because what I'm planning on doing with this guy is I'll get this skeleton all set up and going, right? I'll get it all hooked up, and then what I will do is I'll use a rod to hold up the animal. I was hoping to be able to do this at school, which is why I waited on this video. You'll notice I have more beard now than I did in the last videos, because at school I have one that's already done, and I can show you that image. I unfortunately don't have access to get at it right now. So I want to drill a hole and insert and get this guy in here. A lot of times I can double check that I have things set in the right position. Like, does this go this way? Does it go this way, that way? You got to make sure you have it right, okay? I actually, to give you an idea of what hydrogen peroxide will do over time, this is about a 3 to 5 day soak in 10% hydrogen peroxide. Looks pretty good. This one got left in there accidentally, and it sat in there with a skull, and then they did construction on the building. So this sat in there for about 3 months. Too much. It's really chalky and dusty. It'll come apart. The bone has deteriorated some, but that was one bone that got left behind. And that, of course, attaches there and becomes your spine, and then the tail comes out here. So kind of, there we go. Got it centered right. So anyways, let's do a leg. So I've got my femur. What I want to do is first get an idea of what the angle is. Now you can take, if you want to hot glue stuff, hot glue is great for temporary and for doing ribs. Works really well. It does make a lot of strings, like those little hot glue strings. You got to cut those off, otherwise they kind of ruin the look of the project. I could hot glue this joint quick, and that'll hold it in place, and then I can hold it and drill my holes. I prefer to drill the holes first. So I'm looking here. I want my wire to go in right here. There's a little bit of a notch inside there. That's going to be convenient for me. Make sure that I've got the right size drill bit. And you gotta make sure you have enough battery. You can tell that I'm prepared. So I have a hole there, then I'll be able to glue the wire in place, and I can bend this wire and then connect it to the other bone. I'll have to do, I mean, really, I probably don't need to demonstrate that. You find a drill bit, size of your wire. I just use 14 gauge fence wire because that's what I have. And I use it for other tax memory projects, so it's something that I buy a roll of, and I've got horses that live inside a wire fence. All right, let's say I'm just gluing some bones together like this. This is the arm. You've got to have right joint here, and then that guy, like an elbow, will sit here. There I've got a shoulder blade, an elbow, and a wrist. So the wrist is probably the biggest pain in the butt, and again, it's looking at all the pieces. There's like 5 to 7 bones that go into the wrists right along here. Also, the ankle is a challenge. But let's say I'm just going to glue These two look like they are ready for me to glue. All right. So I want to find the socket that they go, get the position right. And then again, I really like to use this super glue. I'm supposed to shake it. And I'll be happy to answer questions. If you're doing this for the workshop, I would love to answer all your questions. Put a little bit on there. Put a little bit on both surfaces. Don't get it on your fingers. It does bond instantly to fingers. So I get that bone positioned about where I feel it belongs. Have a hand free. And then I use an accelerator, which works amazingly well to instantly adhere. So I'm going to set them just how I like it. That is going to take that glue. If I have a good surface here, it's going to instantly set that glue. I like to have a lot of angles. So like students will look at the raccoon that I've done. Just set that from the side. When you're doing taxidermy projects, most of your first taxidermy, squirrel and stuff like that, are going to come out like this. The kids are going to do the arms and they'll be like, I shaped it. And it's like, well, think of the natural shape. Your shoulders, if you're a squirrel and you're jumping, fine, running, whatever. But one arm is almost always back. And so that elbow off of your shoulder blade here, let's use the shoulder blade clavicle here. This one right here, that's going to be back, right? And your arm is therefore going to be coming, it'll look like this. Like that. So that's kind of the shoulder blade and arm. And then the rest of that, the other two bones that make up this being the elbow here, are going to face forward. And then if you're extended, it's still going to look about like that. It's not going to be a lot of that straight angle. You kind of want a little bit of bend to it in shaping these things. Oh, if we talk about claws, I sometimes leave the claw on, and you'll notice there's a little bit of hair here. It has a kind of a cool look, especially if you can get them attached. Of course, I had one group. I break up all these things. So like one group got the front left leg, one group got front right. Like one group kept their claws together, the other didn't, and the claws are lost. That's fine. Again, it's a classroom specimen. It's more about having fun at this point. I had kids glue together their foot. This is not how you glue together a foot. You know, if you think of a raccoon, it's possible for them to stretch and flatten it out. But even humans, naturally, you have a curve to that. I guess this one's easier to see. You have a curve to your hand. Make sure you're adding that curve naturally to your animals. And this was hot glue. Hot glue kind of sticks out a little bit, but they were really, that group in particular was struggling that day, and they just did it this way. The advantage to hot glue is I can actually take and bend this a little bit without breaking it, and then I can probably get the wrist put together behind that correctly. Comparative anatomy is fun to talk about in doing the skeletal articulation. I think that's probably the most valuable scientific side of it is, let's talk about the animal, how did it live? When we get into teeth, this is a blast. I have a cat skull, like a bobcat, and then I have a raccoon skull next to each other, and they're about the same size animal. And I'm like, kids, tell me what this is. I set out 4 or 5 skulls. I got a small black bear, looks almost like a dog, which throws kids off a lot, which is fun. But we talk about premolars and molars, and the fact that if a raccoon has that, it must be omnivorous and have the ability to chew other objects, whereas the cat lacks those, doesn't have the same number of teeth, and that's kind of fun to talk about. Comparative anatomy is probably my favorite part. Getting to the hands, when we do cow legs, which again, you can do cow legs at home. I have, you end up with a calf that died, and and the neighbor says, hey, you want this? You can take and do that. Calf legs, when young animal legs are a little harder because the bones are softer, but it's not terrible. In large animals, small animals, the young ones are really pretty tough. If you lose a couple-week-old gerbil, I wouldn't do that one. So, but anyways, calf legs, it's fun to talk about. Okay, they're standing on that very last digit, right? And 4 of them, or 3 of them, I should say, are fused together. And then behind it are 2 little phantom bones that come up from the middle part. This part of their foot, or this part of our hand on a calf leg, is 3 bones that are fused and the 2 sticking out that sit behind them. And those are what make up that cannon bone or that first leg bone that you see in cattle. And that's really fun to see and talk about. Oh man, so they're standing like this, and the fingernail, you got the hoof. A lot of comparative anatomy is really where I go with the science side of it. And then the hands-on, let's build a puzzle. Let's talk about why do these vertebrae, and ask the kids. I mean, make it as inquiry-based as possible. Where is the actual joint on the vertebrae? What is rubbing on what? One cool thing is hot glue on vertebrae really look like cartilage, or looks like cartilage. It does a really good job. And these vertebrae were well done and put together, but you can look at the actual joint where the bones connect, and the fact that the rest of this can stretch a little bit as you're moving. That's a fun thing to tie into this lesson. A lot of times, I figure some questions are gonna be, how long does this take? Really, if you can get a raccoon, let's just use a raccoon because it's easy. The previous videos you saw, I may have referenced raccoons, but they're actually done with a cat that had passed on that we had access to. So, and that's why the skull also looks a little different if you look closely. Anyhow, on a raccoon, you get the specimen if it's fresh and not frozen. The goal is day 1. If you have blocks, an hour and a half, that's perfect, because in day 1 you should be able to completely skin it and break it down by part in about 20 minutes. If you don't have blocks, I would maybe introduce the raccoon and say, hey guys, we're pulling it out of the freezer today. It's going in the fridge. We're going to do it in 2 days. Or if it's not blocked, it's probably the next day. Then I would skin it, tell them about it, maybe video if you want to show them, but skin it prior, or have a different kid come in. Hey, who can come in before school and skin this? Get the raccoon skinned so that you can work a little faster. Because then what you do is you section limbs and you go, right front, you got it. And you just take and section that off. And it's really, when you get around the socket, it's like doing other taxidermy. You get around the socket, you trim all the meat around it, you try to get off the cartilage and the tendons and stuff. And then you can generally just pop that out of socket and hand one group. You got left front, you got right front. You can add other activities. I'm going to have a couple Word document type activities or assignments that I incorporate with this. I do a lot of, hey guys, I'll write it on the board. You are going to create a plan or a guide to how to taxidermy, or how to skeletal articulate an animal, or articulate the animal skeleton. And I'll put that up there. That's a lot of times how I do the assignments, but I do have a couple little like daily exit questions, things like that. But so I'll get kids going on this, and I'll give them that limb, and in day 1, the goal is to get all the meat off that they can. Most of the time it doesn't happen in day 1. And if you're not on block, it's probably not going to happen in day 1 at all. Then save that, just put it in the fridge. If you have them the next day. If you have them in 2 days and they got pretty good, put that limb then in the freezer, and then pull it out the next morning in the fridge, whatever. It doesn't hurt to freeze and thaw, and freeze and thaw. It doesn't make a difference. The main goal is just to make it not stinky. You know, meat in the fridge for 4 or 5 days will start to get stinky, but 1 day is probably fine. 2 days are fine. So you pull that out, and then you have them get all the meat off, which is a previous video. Then cook it, the simmer. That takes a day. A lot of times I like to say, okay, guys, you got all the meat off. Great job. Put it in these little cheesecloth bags. Drop it in my bin. I let my bin sit until the next morning. A lot of times I'll put it in the fridge, or I'll put it in the freezer too. If I'm like, oop, got a stink, don't have space in the fridge, I'll drop it in the freezer. I have a freezer dedicated to Texan. Then I'll pull it out the next morning. If class is 4th block or 3rd, if it's in the afternoon, I'll pull it out in the morning, simmer it for 4 hours. If it's not in the afternoon, a lot of times if it's a morning class, I'll actually simmer it that day for the 4 hours while I'm at school. That way I don't have to worry about getting up early. I'm up early anyways, but not going to school. Then I'll take that, I'll drain liquid off of it outside onto the gravel or in the flower bed or whatever you have. Try to drain liquid off. I like to use I have a collapsible screen at school that keeps anything extra from falling out, like if a bone got missed in their cheesecloth bag or something. But I'll drain that water off, and then I will take that whole bucket and just set it in the freezer or the fridge after cooking it. And then the next morning, all I have to do is get it hot. Okay, so then I won't necessarily have to simmer for 4 hours. All I have to do is put in new water, a little bit of dish soap, set it on the burner or the cooker, and let it go for, class starts in an hour, perfect. Get it hot, then drain off the liquid right before class, give it 10 minutes to cool, hand it out then, because it's going to be easier for them to scrape off the warm meat than it is doing cold. So that's scraping off all the meat would be like day 3. Then once they have that, you bag it up, you put it in the hydrogen peroxide for 3 days, or ammonia and then hydrogen peroxide for 3 days. Ammonia can be just a day, that's fine. Then I generally go, okay guys, here's where we're doing. If we're doing a raccoon, a lot of times I'll show the video out of Canada, Raccoon Nation. It was a nature special on PBS. It's just a 1-hour film, but it does a good job about talking about raccoons in the city and their adaptations. We'll get into the adaptations. Then we'll talk about, well, let's look at this limb. Let's look at how that wrist joint works. Raccoons can pronate and supinate, right? And we talk about those things. We talk about the abilities that they have, and then their teeth. Talk about how they're able to survive in the city better than most other animals, eating garbage and eating other things. So we talk about their digestive systems. So we'll spend a day on that. On the video, we'll spend another day where we kind of have discussions about it. I'll have them do a little research on adaptations. Sometimes I'll do a Great Lakes wildlife research project where they have to write a story about a wildlife species in the Great Lakes region. That's generally what I do if I'm doing a raccoon in class. Occasionally I'll do a little bit of large animal science, like I'll throw in a bone articulation on large animal science. And if I'm doing that, it's mainly like, hey, I have a calf leg, guys. We're going to talk about the comparative anatomy. But then I'm doing all the prep work to get them there so that it's like 2 class periods. And one of them is focused on the, comparative anatomy. So what else do I do? So that's, then gluing it back together is generally 2 days. If the kids did a good job, kept all their leg parts together, they should be able to glue it in 2 days. Pick up a class set of this, and the class set, if you have 24 kids, it's 6 groups or 5 groups, 5 bottles of glue. That's not bad, and they're not terribly expensive. I generally don't give kids this because I don't care if they have to sit and hold it for so long. That doesn't bug me. There are some cool tools out there. I saw someone who's doing this. I joined a Facebook group called Articulation Nation, where they just do skeletal articulation. And someone had this pad that had, if you've ever seen those gorilla stands for phones or cameras that can wrap around, it's like monkey arms, like it wraps around things. I think they're called gorilla grips or something. But it had all of those. He called it his octopus. It had 8 arms with little alligator clips on them. And he can just take and clip the bones into place, get them lined up, drop a glue, spray it and done. And then you don't even need an accelerator because you drop a glue, you just give it time. Another thing you can do is you can hot glue a joint and then go through and find a different part of the joint to put super glue to help hold. The third glue I do like to use is epoxy. I find a 5-minute clear epoxy works really well. The downside to epoxy is it yellows a little bit more. I don't believe anyone was using epoxy on this skeleton, but oh yeah, there's epoxy, I think. It definitely yellows in the middle of that joint more than the hot glue does. Hot glue tends to look a little better in certain joints. So epoxy will yellow more. However, on a knee or an elbow, a little yellowing is not such a bad thing down inside the joint. Again, you can talk about a lot of the glue is filling that spot where there would be cartilage and making that joint work. If you want your skeleton to move, to have the ability to move, a lot of people will pick up little eye hooks and chains, and then you drill your hole in the bone a little bit smaller, like I was doing here, somewhere on this guy. You drill your hole a little bit smaller, and then what you'll do, yeah, there it was, is find a threaded eye hook and thread that in, and then put a little chain so that it can hang and move. So you can talk about movement. That's a great way to connect them. Again, I like wire, but most of mine that we're putting together, we're then putting on a shelf up above in the classroom. And by most, I mean I've assembled one successfully. We've got bones for another 3, but classes, well, bones for 2, but classes kind of ran out of time. Mainly March happened, and you know, the week of crazy that was there. So what else do I got for you? Information. If you come up with questions, join my Q&A. I believe it's at 8 a.m. on Tuesday, or it might be 9 a.m. If you join the Q&A and you didn't watch the videos yet, well, then this message doesn't matter. You'll watch that later, but I'll certainly answer questions there too if you got to the videos or not. Yeah, other tools I really like using these guys. Gives me an ability to pick up hemostat. This one's a little small for this job, but can hold a rib in place, set it down, and then I've got the ability to hold the vertebrae against that rib. Okay. I believe that's the major stuff that I do. It's always good to have a pliers on hand or wire snips. It's skeletal articulation. It's fun. It can be educational. You got to make sure you tie in the science side of it. Give them some inquiry. Ask them when kids are going to raise their hand. I don't know how these bones go. Research, look it up, find a picture, and then point to me, like call me back and say, hey, I still don't know where these bones go. And then when you come back, go, okay, that one looks similar to that, but a little bit different. Let's look at the width. Let's look at the bones from above. Do a little more inquiry. Try to figure it out. Try to think about it. I've made plenty of mistakes myself in what goes where. Not realizing, oh, is this the cervical vertebrae? Does this guy go up here? Or, which, to be honest, I thought it did. It certainly looks like it could. But earlier I was like, oh, it fits down here, perfect. Well, no, of course, this bone goes there. So, doing some figuring and thinking about it, and being, really just being thoughtful and saying, hey guys, think. Give it a shot. Have fun with skeletal articulation. I know my videos aren't great. The quality's not great. I don't know technology all that well, but we're having fun, and that's the key, and hopefully learning something, and enjoy your summer. Thanks, guys.